Hello, and welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast, a show hosted by me, Veronica Kokos, holistic voice teacher and singer just like you. Grab a cup of tea, relax, and sit back as we discuss all things singing technique, mindset tips, and more so you can show up as the most confident and creative singer you can be. Hi, y'all, and welcome to another episode of No Wrong Notes. Now, I usually don't do 2 interview episodes back to back, but last week's and this week's episodes were too good not to give to you guys. This week's episode is with Abby Halpin, a physical therapist and coach for musicians. I loved picking Abby's brain in this episode, especially when it comes to things that singers and musicians can do to take care of their bodies, to avoid injury, and get the most out of their singing and playing. It was really cool to get Abby's perspective, and I know you'll enjoy this episode. A little bit about Abby before we get started. Abby's practice, Forte Performance and Physical Therapy, provides both virtual and mobile coaching sessions to help musicians feel healthy and sound their best. Abby is a singer and pianist and knows what it takes and feels like to be a musician. She has led workshops, guest lectures, and master classes on how movement affects singing and playing for organizations such as the National Association of Teachers of Singing, Performing Arts Medicine Association, Northwest Voice, and the Vermont Music Teachers Association, as well as for many collegiate vocal pedagogy courses and individual studios. Abby's mission is to help musicians prepare for the physical aspects of making music and lift the limits on their creativity by providing the same resources that traditional athletes have to creative athletes. Abby loves to chat, so please reach out to her on Instagram at Forte Performance PT or email Abby at forteperformancept.com. I will link those in the show description. I will link her practice in the show description. And in the meantime, let's get to the interview with Abby Halpin. Welcome. It's Abby Halpin. Welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast.
Yay! Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, thanks for coming on. Before we dive into the meat of our questions today, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself to our listeners here. Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to where you are in your career as a physical therapist and fitness coach, specifically for musicians, which I think is so cool.
Yeah. So I'm Abby. I'm a physical therapist and a fitness coach. As you said, I've been working as a physical therapist for like 15-ish years or something. And most of that time has been kind of in like traditional PT settings. You know, in a clinic, people come and I have back pain, it hurts when I work, you know, that kind of stuff. And about 5 years ago, I decided to go off on my own and do my own practice. Oddly enough, no motivation at all to work with musicians other than I love musicians and I am one myself, but I had other reasons for doing it and named my practice Forte because I grew up playing classical piano, I sing, and I also am really into weightlifting. And I liked the be loud, take up space, musical, be strong, like kind of compilation of all the meanings of that word. And amazingly enough, just by naming my practice that, I ended up getting a whole bunch of musicians coming to me. And so it organically came about. Now it worked out because being a musician myself, I speak the language, I totally understand. I will not talk about your practice instead of your rehearsal, you know, like I can speak the life language of being a musician, and I understand the physical rigors of playing instruments and of singing and of being on stage or all the rehearsal time. And so it just kind of naturally grew into what it is now. And so now I work with musicians virtually, which is great because most people play like multiple instruments, and so they don't have to like lug a bunch of stuff into a clinic. And I both work with them on like kind of traditional rehab, like, oh, you have tendonitis, let's work through that, and things like let's develop a fitness program so that you are prepared for that busy season ahead, or this role that you're playing that requires 4 flights of stairs behind the set, all of that, all of that. And it's been a complete blast and a population of people that I am so familiar with, I love dearly, and there is a giant hole of resources for in healthcare. And it's just been like my honor to be part of the journey.
That's so cool. And I think you're exactly right. Like, I mean, I really don't know many. I mean, sure that they're out there. I'm sure that they're out there, but I
Yeah.
really haven't seen that many physical therapists that are geared specifically towards musicians. And I was just thinking as you were talking, I have a student who sings and plays, and she plays guitar, and she's got a lot of like arthritis issues and things like that. And that's something that we've kind of been like, well, obviously I can't treat her or anything like that, but that's something that her and I talk about a lot, like kind of like how she's doing with that. And I know that she's been going to PT for that, but I don't know that they're always taken into consideration like her playing and things like that. And so I think that you are definitely providing something that is like missing out there, honestly. Now, when it comes to some of the most common physical challenges that you see, what are some of the most common things that you see in instrumentalists versus singers? Like, do you treat instrumentalists differently than singers, or are there commonalities that people might not be aware of?
So there's way more commonalities than differences, mostly in the like how things come about. So in the music world, in the performance world, the time for recovery or the like in season, out off season in sports language doesn't exist in always the same way. And so there's just kind of this like massive like undercurrent of under recovery a lot in a lot of musicians. And that is across the board between instrumentalists and singers. Um, People can create their own time away from their instrument, of course, but it's kind of a year-round activity. Um, and so that's the major commonality, is that a lot of times we're building strategies about how to navigate like the schedule of what's coming up. And that's both for like amateur and professional musicians. Um, and so, yeah, we do a lot of like, tell me exactly how many hours of practice you're doing. Let's lay out, what does Monday look like? What does Tuesday look like? What, we like, and that includes like, what are your work tasks? What other parts of your life are adding into the stress or the lack of stress that your body is reacting to? So the bigger conversations are basically the same. The differences are, I would say, I think the biggest difference is I have way more instrumentalists who come to me for pain, like pain, injury type circumstances. And for vocalists, I get a lot more of like, how am I supposed to be doing this? Or I would like to sound differently than I do now. It's a little bit more like function forward than something that's painful. I think part of that is just because of who I am and what I offer. People who have pain, I do work with, but I also need other members of the voice team, like a speech pathologist, an ENT, other people to be part of that conversation. That it's not in my scope of practice. So usually when I'm working with singers, it's more like, I have no idea what my core is. Is my pelvic floor supposed to be doing something? Is my, like or I had back pain last month and now I sound weird. It's that kind of discussion.
Wow, that is so interesting. Because I think of yeah, because I mean, like, I was just thinking, I was like, the SLP or the voice teacher kind of also has to be a part of that conversation. But, I have had students before, like, I had one who had pelvic floor dysfunction and that affecting her singing. And I know she went to PT for that too. And so it's so interesting how, like, and I like too what you were saying about there not kind of being an off season for musicians, because I also run and I'm training for a half marathon right now, and it's like that's exciting, but I also know that I'll have like a couple months basically in between races where I'll be like just kind of building fitness. It's not like I'm going to be training for something, but musicians don't really get that because it's kind of like you go from one gig to prep for the next gig to the next gig. It's kind of like one thing after the other, and I don't think we really think about those things. So I like hearing that perspective. When it comes to pain, you were talking before about how you have a lot of clients, specifically a lot of instrumentalists that will come for pain and things like that. What is a misconception musicians often have about pain, fatigue, or injuries in their craft? Just because I feel like, especially too, in undergrad, I had a lot of friends that were instrumentalists and like a lot of friends that played brass or like percussion, things like that. And I feel like I think of the things that they would experience. And I feel like they were the kind of people that would just kind of like push through things, like practice for hours and hours at a time, which makes sense. Like, I mean, like I would walk past like the piano performance majors practicing for like 8 hours at a time in the practice room and like other instrumentals like that. But I feel like a lot of the kind of mindset around that is like to just push through it. And I feel like that's maybe just asking for trouble at a certain point if you're not careful.
Yeah, musician or not. That is the problem. Yeah, for sure. Runners for sure. Uh, yeah. Oh, gosh, there are so many misconceptions around pain because pain is so weird. I think the number one thing that I find brought to my attention is that musicians will think that pain is their fault. Like they've done something wrong or their technique is wrong, or that's probably the top one. My technique is wrong and therefore I have pain. Um, or I should have changed my schedule. Like there's something that they could have done that keeps pain solely in their control. And like my answer to that is like, oh, if only. Pain and injury are just kind of part of the experience of being human. And in every industry, there's some talk about, this is true in sports as well, like injury prevention. And you really cannot prevent an injury. You can't. It's just gonna happen at some point. And the only thing that we can do is prepare. We can prepare for an injury itself, meaning like set up our lives around the idea that we'll have to stay adaptable or surround ourselves with people who, are going to be supportive. There are things that we can prepare for that way. And we can prepare for whatever roles we have coming up, whatever gigs we have coming up, whatever our music goals are. And that's where I feel like I can be the best help is in the preparation. But I wouldn't call it prevention. And I also would really encourage musicians to just take like fault and blame off the table and just go, yep, I'm a human and it happened. Now what is the real question? Like we, as much as possible, we can skip over that, like, what have I done to myself stage.
Yeah, and I think that, I especially see that in singing or just in the singing world. I see a lot of that. I feel like where you would maybe hear from a lot of older teachers, like kind of the older generation of teachers, where it's like, well, if people like Adele, because I remember that was a big conversation a
I
couple years
totally, I
ago.
was just thinking about
Yeah,
that.
I was like, if people like Adele, are having, vocal issues or need surgery on their voice, then they must be doing something wrong technically. And I feel like I really appreciate you sharing that perspective of, especially too as you get older, I think that injury, it's like nothing to be ashamed about. It's like something that is worth preparing for.
Mhm.
And you can, I guess, try to prevent it with healthy practices and things like that, or practices that, support your mobility and things like that. But yeah, I think especially in the singing world, I've seen a lot of that. And I think I really appreciate you sharing that because I think, like, I mean, it's like, who are y'all? Are y'all Adele's voice teacher? Do y'all understand? Like, I mean, are y'all the ones working with her? How can y'all say for sure that it's her fault or it's her technique's fault? That sort of thing,
Yeah.
Um,
And there's technique, there's circumstances, there's
yeah.
schedules.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many variables that go into pain and injury. There's lack of sleep. There's what food is available. There's just so many variables that to take full responsibility for it is like just not reasonable.
Exactly. Now, how do you approach helping someone who's maybe dealing with pain but still needs to perform? We were just talking about how there's not really an off season for musicians. So, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think step number one is always like rule out red flags. Is there anything dangerous? Am I worried about like the structural health of, the elbow or the vocal cords or whatever we're talking about? And rule out kind of the scary stuff that would make me go, up, cancel those performances. Because that does happen. We're just talking about Adele. She had to cancel some stuff. That does happen, but we want to rule that out. Most of the time, that's not the case. Most pain and injuries, there are ways to kind of like duck and weave and get around it and keep going in some capacity. Um, and some of those red flags are things like pain that wakes you up at night, um, swelling that like just will not go away, bruising, that kind of stuff. There's there's often like a sense of dread that people have, which can exist even without the red flag, but that's important to consider. There's just these little check boxes that I kind of go through and make sure that we're not looking at anything scary. Pain itself is not scary. Pain plus some of these other things is more like something that we need to address more immediately. And if not, then we start getting strategic. The first thing is, how can we change this experience? Can we put something onto your body that will make you feel differently? Is there something we can change about the schedule, the costumes, um, the way that you're going to sing this? There are ways that we can pull back or push forward, so that the performance can kind of go on. And then the other step is basically to how can we prepare for pain? If you're going to perform and it's going to be painful, how can we be ready for that? And often it's just setting that expectation and developing some kind of routine that allows for recovery, that allows for reducing the pain immediately afterward, so that then, say you've got another show the next day or something, you have a strategy to make a quicker turnaround. Um, and also, what kind of movements, this is one of my favorite things, what kind of movements can we find that alleviates the pain while you are performing? And I usually try to find the sneakiest one. Like, what can we do where your audience is going to be like, I have no idea that she's doing a thing right now. But in that person's mind, they're going, I'm doing my PT and I'm singing. So that's one of my favorite ways to kind of be sneaky about it. And then the last step is to look at the like underlying reasons. Why is this happening? Can we develop a long-term strategy that we can start to build on now so that this is a shorter bout of time that you're having pain? Um, that's kind of like it's the last step. It's the most important one in terms of the long haul, but changing experience and like building a routine that helps you prepare for the discomfort is the acutely the most important.
I love that. And I think like, because I think so often with, at least with singers, I think that there's this idea, and I was kind of taught this too, where it was like, well, if you are, oh, I don't know, like if you are experiencing, I mean, like obviously, if you're having some pain here at the vocal fold level, that's definitely something talk to a SLP about and kind of get some opinions there. But it's like, if you're having some, like sometimes my students will come in and like they're having things like shoulder pain or like I just saw a student right before this who she was saying how she was clenching her jaw, having some jaw pain and things like that. And it's like, I know that those are like very specific things, and it's kind of like you were saying, sort of getting to the root of like, why is this happening in the first place? Why is sort of jaw tension coming into the picture? Are we grinding our teeth at night? Is there sort of stress at play? That sort of thing. But I think like sometimes with singers, it's like if those things are happening, there can be almost like a hesitation to go on with the show or go on with like the
Mm,
performance sometimes.
yeah.
And like, of course, if you're in a lot of extreme pain, I mean, like that's a whole nother story. But it's like, I love that you have this approach where it's like, well, what are the things that we can control right now? What are things that we can do right now to like still show up on stage and like do maybe some of these sneaky things that like we know are going to help. But you know, maybe the audience isn't super aware of those things. So I like that you kind of have this game plan that you use with instrumentalists and singers and musicians. That is awesome. Um, Kind of pivoting to something a little bit more practical. I mean, all of this is practical, all of this is super, super helpful. But I can imagine that there are some singers and musicians listening to this and they're like, all of this is super great. Love hearing all of this. It's, you know, getting the wheels turning up here. But, you know, they're maybe thinking about what can I do today to sort of support my body, support my instrument. If a musician could only do one simple movement or stretch daily, what would you recommend?
This is such a cruel question because I'm like, which instrument? Are we talking cellist or are we talking singer? Are we talking, you know?
And if you want to even like give like one for instrumentalists and one for singers, like if there are different things, that's fine
Yeah.
too.
I would say it's even hard to break down instrumentalists because a violinist is better is different than some person playing a saxophone. But across the spectrum of musicians, I would probably say it's a tie between just squats, like just in place, no weight, just doing some squats, or just going for a walk. The reason I picked those two is because, especially for people who moving air is part of their instrument, those two activities help to kind of coordinate and move all the layers of diaphragms together. And when I say that, I'm including like, you know, the diaphragm, pelvic floor, even your hips, the arches of your feet, like everything moving together to absorb pressure, like pressure management as you breathe and as you move. Um, the squat is a little more of a symmetrical version of that, and then the walking is kind of that alternating version of that. So I would put those two up there.
Those are awesome. Yeah, I think those are great. I think too, like, those are like if somebody has like knee issues too, I can see how like squats might be a little bit harder, but how like I think of some of my older students in particular, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But I also know that even though they might have a hard time with squats, they do tend to be people that go on walks daily that are able to do that. And so I like that you know, you're kind of giving these options here in terms of like intensity and kind of how engaged these muscles are and how much you kind of have to use there. So that's great. That is awesome.
It's a very kind way of saying you couldn't choose one when I asked you to pick one.
No, no. I, well, I mean, it's like, I'm sure it's like when voice teachers get asked, like, what is the one exercise that you would give to all singers? Like, it's like,
Right? You're like,
it's
but
like,
which one? Which singer
it's like,
specifically?
yeah, what singer specifically? I don't know. Like, oh, like my tendency would be to be like something with the breath, but like, yeah. So I'm sorry for how cruel of a question that was.
It's a good question. It's a good question.
um, when it comes to recovery, because I think sometimes, like, I mean, I will sometimes talk about recovery with singers, specifically like vocal cool downs and things like that, and I will do some of those myself after like a long work day. But I don't think recovery is talked about as often when it comes to music. What do you think is the most underrated recovery tool for musicians after long rehearsals or gigs? And I know too, we just talked about having a exercise or a tool for instrumentalists versus singers. So it's okay if you have like multiple answers to this
Right.
one, since the needs might be a little different.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stay super broad. I think the number one tool is planning. And I say this because usually what I see is that sometimes musicians kind of end up being like a victim of their own schedule. Um, that's probably too strong, but you know what I mean. Um, where they like complete a gig and then they get another one and they say yes. And so you kind of keep saying yes because you love what you do and it's exciting and all good things. But planning ahead for when the downtime is available and taking it when it comes. And I think also planning like how, say you have, a full weekend of performances. What is like ahead of time on Thursday, decide what Monday looks like. How am I going to get the food that I need to recover? How am I going to ensure that I get my 7 to 9 hours of sleep? How am I going to ensure that I actually take Monday off and I don't go, "Ah, I really messed up that phrase. I'm just going to go practice that for 3 hours." Um, like planning for the time off. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to sit in Netflix, which I also, great, do that too. It can be like, I'm going to organize my stuff or get through all of my emails, like things that like actually matter for your music life can still happen, but just maybe time away from an instrument or time doing something completely different. Maybe you're typically an opera singer and you're going to tool around with like a fun, easy pop song that like the back of your hand, right? Something that's kind of like in the active recovery. So, like, what type of recovery are we doing? When is it going to happen? And how can I actually make sure that it happens? I'm going to bookmark that time for myself. Because if you don't rest, your body will create the circumstances to force you to. So I don't, I'm not a PT who says to stop doing something when it hurts. I always want to encourage people to keep doing what they want to do, but I do tell people to schedule recovery first and then fill in the rest of the days because it's very easy to fill in those quote unquote blank days. They're not blank. You're doing something when you're recovering.
Yes, and that's something I try to tell students too, because sometimes they'll ask, like, how often should I practice? Or how often should I? I mean, it even comes down to stuff like that. Like, I mean, singers that are maybe not doing professional gigs, but it's like, even for something like that, if you're practicing, if you're working at your instrument, if you're working on your voice, it's important to have downtime in there. It's important to have time for your body to recover, to have rest days. And I feel like I've only gotten more appreciative of that concept as I've gotten older. Like I have if I'm working, teaching 6 to 7 hours, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday through Sunday, I am not doing much singing at all because I'm just like resting or doing like minimal singing because it's like your body needs time to recover from these things. And I think in my past, like back when I was in undergrad, pushing through things was normal and something that I did that I'm like looking back and like, oh, idiot, idiot. but every single time it resulted in something like that was not, it was not a desired result, pushing through an illness and then getting even more sick. And it's like stuff like that. It's important to have these rest days. And like, I like to think, even since I got back into running last spring, and knowing how important those rest days are in between like the days that I'm running, or like, if I'm running Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday is off, and like knowing that my body is recovering on those rest days. Like it's actually doing something. Your body is doing something on these days that you take off. It's not like you're being lazy. It's not like nothing is happening. It's like that's part of the work too, as musicians that we have to do.
Yeah, it's actually part of getting better, of
Yeah.
improving, even just from a learning standpoint.
Yeah,
Like a
right?
like a learning new rep, or like you have to have your brain has to have some downtime to process everything.
Yeah, and I think like probably some of that comes just from like I think some of that can come from like the wider culture. I think that there's definitely been some pushback on a lot of kind of hustle culture over the last like recent, I guess, past year or so or two or whatever, last couple of years. But I feel like, I think that there's still this kind of mentality where it's like, you gotta hustle, 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 and like always be working, always be productive. And like, I am glad to see that there's like pushback on that's happening. Just because yeah, it's not healthy. But I think that, yeah, that some of that definitely filters down into musician world, and in kind of our world. And thinking about just like this space that we're in of musicians, instrumentalists, singers, where do you see the future of musician health and wellness going? And what should today's performers be doing to keep up? Like, if we're talking about, like, we were just talking about this kind of mentality of hustle culture and that impacting how we treat our instrument or basically treating our bodies. Yeah, what should today's performers be thinking about and doing?
Yeah, it's interesting because the what you just said about kind of hustle culture, being challenged, but simultaneously other things are happening at the same time that are making us work differently, but still hard. Musicians are now kind of required to also be content creators at the same time. Um, there's just so many different like facets of being a musician, and it requires a little bit more time with the instrument, even if it's not in the same kind of like hustle, or you won't make it, or you're not meant for this industry or whatever, right? So I think more than ever, we need to take the life of a musician and the physical requirements that it takes to make music as seriously as we do athletics. There's a model already that has its flaws 100% in athletics, that where we support their physical health and their mental health. But here I am as a physical therapist, right? So I'm going to talk about the physical side. um, and so what my hope for the future of being a musician is that we can implement some of those things. We can have athletic trainers and physical therapists on staff in music departments and music programs. Some collegiate programs are starting to do that, yay, but it's way too what's the phrase I'm trying to think of? Far and few what is the word?
Yes, like far and few between, not as
Yeah. Yes,
not as
thank you.
prevalent, not as prevalent
Yes,
maybe.
it's too rare. I was just working with a violinist last week who's returning to college. This is the first few weeks of college are always when people get hurt. Because the volume of their practice time goes way up. So I was looking up some of the resources that they have at this particular program. They've got like 8 athletic trainers on staff for this D3 sports program. D3 sports are amazing. Yay, they should be fully supported. I love sports. And they have zero for a very high level music program. This is like D1 music. What are we doing? Where is the team? Where's the support staff? So I would like to see musicians starting to build in like a plan for themselves as though they are a more traditional athlete, meaning they're preparing for what they know that they want to be able to do soon, or that they have to be able to do soon. They have support staff around, or a team around that they've built to help with their physical health, and keeping their like long-term health in mind, because this is not something I can't tell you how many tears have been shed over, is this the end of my time with my guitar, whatever, right? We need to make sure that people are playing their instruments forever for their own happiness, let alone maybe a livelihood or something else. So taking kind of more of the sports model and applying the good parts of it to the performing arts world, I think is where it needs to be.
I like that idea because I do think that as singers, as instrumentalists, we are athletes, and that, our bodies are doing a lot of these repetitive motions and things like that in different ways.
Yeah.
But, you know, our overall, like everything, our overall health, all of this impacts our ability to play, our ability to sing. And it's like, I don't know why we don't why we don't I mean, I guess I do understand why we don't think of musicians as like athletes, or like in the traditional sense, like if we're thinking like, football, track star, or anything like that.
Right,
But
right.
it's like we're still using our bodies to like, and like I was saying earlier, like my friends that my good friends that would be practicing for hours and hours at a time. Like as singers, I think like in my own practice, when I think probably the most I would ever practice would be like an hour or two a day when I was in grad school, which is like, that was like what my teacher was recommending for being in the master's program. But it's like you had instrumentalists, like I was saying, like some of the piano performance majors would be in the practice room for like 8 hours a day. And so, so
Yeah.
it's like, why aren't we considering musicians more from that
Yeah.
lens, you know?
If we think about like the types of fitness that humans, can develop or kind of be born with like being extra good at. I
Yeah.
mean, agility, strength. Some of these
Uh-huh.
movements are heavy. Sometimes setup and teardown is a workout,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know? Strength, stamina. You already talked about stamina with those dang 8-hour rehearsals. Power, like all of these things feed into just simple things like what dynamic level are you playing at? If you really break down the like physical movements and requirements to like make your creative choices, you have to be strong enough. You have to have a base like foundation of movements to do the creative stuff that you can think of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without that, it limits the creativity or, you know, limits your choices, I guess.
When I think of how many like opera singers there are out there that are also like marathon runners, or they like do a lot of cardio and things like that, because you think about even just the effort that is required to do like a whole like 2 3 hour production several nights a week, and like bring that sort of stamina. It's like it requires a lot out of you to sing something like that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no, it's just amazing. I think it's so cool, and I'm right there with you. All right, would you like to move on to our rapid fire questions?
Oh my gosh, I'm nervous. I don't know what the questions are gonna be, and now I'm nervous. Okay.
I know, I always like spring these on you guys. I promise I won't bite. That these are all, all in good fun. The first one is coffee or tea. Which do you prefer?
T.
Tea. Okay. What? Sorry, I love
That's
how I said
that's
that.
the normal response. I'm so used to that response. Like, that's so funny.
I
T, like, are you a charisma?
Well, I'm thinking like first thing in the morning. I've definitely tried quite a few times just to have like black tea in the morning.
Yeah,
It just does not have the boost I need that
I get it.
coffee gives me, but I do love my tea too. It's just not like the first thing I'm drinking in the morning. What tea are you thinking about though? What tea do you like?
I usually go for Earl Grey or chai, and then I put a little bit of oat milk in it.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yes, I have a very low tolerance for caffeine.
Oh.
So that's as much caffeine. I have to have one of those, and that's all. And then I might be a little hyper for a little bit. But I'd have really low tolerance for caffeine. So the very, very few times I've had coffee, I've basically given myself like a tremor, a headache, and then I have to
Oh
take a nap.
no.
Like it's not helpful. And everybody else talks about like, ooh, I got my coffee. Now I feel like a person. And I'm like, I don't know what that
I do feel like I am a little sensitive to caffeine. I can only have like 1 cup. If I have more than one
Yeah.
cup, or even like I've started taking like Cliff Blocks on my long runs,
Oh
and they have
yeah.
like caffeine in them, and I'm like, if I have like even one or two of those, I'm like,
Yeah, like
um,
woo.
speaking of exercise, what is your favorite form of exercise or movement?
Oh gosh, I feel like I've done kind of all of them. My favorite is like something with a ball, like playing basketball or soccer. I don't get to do that as much these days. I've been an avid runner in the past, a long distance cyclist. These days, I'm mostly doing strength training. I have a toddler, and so it's kind of okay, what can I do 3 or 4 times a week for a short period of time? And I'm enjoying it. Lifting heavy is very satisfying. I feel very capable. Those little moments in your day where you're like maybe you're traveling and you put the suitcase in your overhead compartment, like wham, no problem. And
Yeah.
you just kind of feel like you can walk around the world like, does anybody need help? I got this. So that's been my favorite recently.
I love that. I love that. I think I only got into like strength training last year just to like supplement running and things like
Yeah.
that. But I am starting to appreciate it a lot more. It's like really a lot of fun when you start to see results from it. You're like, "Oh, like you
Watch
were
the
saying, like
numbers
can I
go
help
up.
it?" Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's always
satisfying.
fun. What is the best place you've traveled to?
Ooh, I'm gonna say New Zealand.
Ooh.
It was so beautiful. The people there were so kind to us. And we got to spend 2 weeks, which is a fairly long trip in terms of how my
Yeah.
life goes. So we got to see a lot of places. Really, really beautiful outdoors. The water is like clean enough to drink.
Wow.
Mind blowing after I lived in the Pacific Northwest for a while, did a lot of backpacking, and it's beautiful there, but it seemed very strange to just drink water out of the stream.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my favorite place, I think.
That's a place I definitely want to go to. I mean,
Highly
I've
recommend.
only seen it, or well, I've seen it in pictures, obviously, but I always think of Lord of the Rings, why? Because that's where
Yes.
they filmed all that. Just like stunning. Um,
Yes.
what is a song that you've had on repeat recently?
Okay, I mentioned my toddler.
I had a feeling.
She has become obsessed because I'm raising her right with Julie Andrews.
Oh,
And she's been listening to the Do Re Mi song from Sound of Music all the time. She calls it Do, and she does this. She can do solfege. She's not even two yet. She's like Do Re Mi. It's very cute. So yeah, that's been, and I still love the song, surprisingly, after hearing it like, I don't know, 100
oh
times
my
a day.
gosh. I love that. That is so sweet. She's going to be a sight reading queen when she gets older.
Yes.
What is a book you recommend that everyone read?
A book. I'm gonna be super nerdy and stay on the nerdy topics we've talked about. And I'm gonna say The Brain That Changes Itself.
Ooh, who is that
It,
by?
oh, great. I don't know. I don't know. Let me Google while we're talking. It has a series of like short stories or like kind of case studies
Oh,
that talks about how the brain is like adaptable and plastic. So we,
hmm.
decades ago thought like if you hurt a nerve or hurt your brain, like it's permanent, can't change.
Yeah.
And this was kind of the book that brought to our attention that no, like it's called neuroplasticity. Like we will continue to adapt and be flexible to adversity, to new things. We can work around things. Let's see. The Brain That Changes Itself. Oh gosh, Norman Doige. How would you say that?
Doige?
Doidge.
Deutsch.
Deutsch.
Maybe. I don't know.
Sure, that's who it's by.
Deutsch?
But he's a researcher in like neurology, and
Oh,
it's
that's
I don't
awesome.
know 5 or 6 different stories of like somebody who had a stroke and their left arm started to work differently if they did this. It's
Wow.
it's interesting. It's a little sciencey, but like the cases make it interesting for anybody to read.
Yeah, that sounds like definitely something I will check out. What is so this is my last rapid fire question, and then you're home free.
Okay, we all
The,
made it.
what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think the best like professional piece of advice is that you don't have to figure it all out the first try. And this was about like, physical therapy. Like somebody comes in with ankle pain and you do all the tests, and in school you learn like you should have a diagnosis at the end of the first day. And then you get out in the real world and you're like, I don't know what's happening. And so what I've taken from that is that like you will continue to collect data as you meet somebody, work with somebody, work on something. Um, and you can keep changing your diagnosis or your theory, your hypothesis as you go and address things as new information comes in.
I love that, and I feel like that is something you could apply to so many other things too. Like I feel like that really encourages just flexibility in thinking, not feeling like, oh, it's always this thing, or this is the issue, or this is, I think, especially to like in my teaching, or like even as a singer, it's like you get so hung up on like, oh, it must be this, or like, oh, I've got to work on this thing, and, or like when I'm working with students too, we're talking about a lot of different things, working on a bunch of different exercises, And I think like for a lot of singers, sometimes that can be overwhelming and they feel like there's this kind of pressure to have it all figured out, have it all right, and like implement that right away. And what I always keep emphasizing to them, like, literally, this is a process. Like, all of this is a process. If you're a musician, you're a teacher, you're figuring it out as you go. You're taking in new data, as you said, and it's okay to like change your mind about something. It's okay to like have more of that information and realize that there's kind of more to the story. So I really like that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Abby, for coming on the No Wrong Notes podcast.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
All right, friends, that is it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Abby, and I hope you'll check her out on Instagram. That's where I connected with her. You can follow her there. You can check out her other offerings, those will be linked in the show description. And I hope that this episode inspires you to think of your body and your instrument, your voice, thinking about these things as if you're an athlete, because you are a singing athlete, you are a vocal athlete, and it's worth thinking of our bodies from this perspective, in this way, and treating our bodies with the sort of care that athletes give to their own bodies. All right, so that is it for this week's episode. In the meantime, happy singing, y'all.